If there is one British train that could turn an ordinary journey into something resembling a ride at a fairground, it has to be the Pacer. Loved by some, disliked by many, and certainly never forgotten, the British Rail Pacers became one of the most distinctive trains ever to operate on Britain's railways. For nearly 4 decades, these small diesel trains rattled, squealed, and most famously, bounced their way around the network. But why were they built? Why did they ride so badly? And how did something originally intended as a cheap, short-term solution survive for so long? This is the bouncing tale of the Pacers. The story begins in the late 1970s and early 1980s. British Rail had a problem. Many of its older first-generation diesel multiple units were approaching the end of their lives, particularly those operating lightly used regional and branch line services. Replacing them with conventional new trains would be expensive, and there was a very real danger that some quieter railway lines might simply be closed. British Rail therefore began experimenting with a much cheaper type of train, and the solution was rather unusual. Instead of designing an entirely conventional railway vehicle, engineers borrowed technology from the bus industry. One of the early experimental vehicles, the Leyland Experimental Vehicle, or LEV, demonstrated the basic idea. A lightweight bus-style body could be mounted onto a railway underframe, producing a vehicle that was relatively cheap to build and operate. Eventually, this concept led to the production Pacers. The Class 141 arrived first, followed by the much better known Classes 142, 143, and 144. The Class 142 was particularly distinctive because its body was derived from the Leyland National Bus, but underneath these lightweight bodies was the feature that would give the Pacer its legendary reputation. Unlike most railway carriages, which use bogies capable of turning beneath the vehicle as it negotiates curves, Pacers had 2 fixed axles attached to each vehicle. This made them cheaper and mechanically simpler. Unfortunately, it also produced some rather interesting consequences. On straight, smooth track, a Pacer could provide a perfectly acceptable journey. But introduce tight curves, complicated point work, or less than perfect track, and things became rather more entertaining. The fixed wheelbase meant the wheels couldn't steer naturally through curves in the same way as a bogie-equipped train. The result was the characteristic squealing of the wheels against the rails, and then there was the ride. Pacers earned a reputation for bouncing, pitching, and rattling over the railway. Passengers sitting towards the ends of the vehicles could sometimes receive a particularly lively demonstration of British railway engineering. On jointed track, the rhythmic bouncing could become even more noticeable. It was this behaviour that helped earn the train's nicknames, including nodding donkeys. Yet despite all the criticism, there is another side to the Pacer story. They were designed to be cheap. And they were. That mattered enormously during an era when Britain's railway finances were under considerable pressure. Pacers allowed British Rail to replace ageing trains while keeping many regional services operating. They became particularly associated with northern England, but Pacers could also be found in Wales, the southwest, and other parts of the network. They worked everything from relatively quiet rural branches to extremely busy commuter services, and this eventually became one of their biggest problems. A train designed as an inexpensive solution for secondary routes increasingly found itself carrying large numbers of passengers into major cities. By the 2000s and 2010s, passengers could find themselves travelling on a Pacer alongside considerably newer trains. The contrast was difficult to ignore. Nevertheless, the Pacers just kept going. The Class 141s disappeared relatively early from normal British passenger service, but the Classes 142, 143 and 144 survived much longer. Some were refurbished, receiving improved interiors, seating and other modifications. But underneath, the fundamental Pacer concept remained. Fixed axles, lightweight construction, and that unmistakable ride. By the late 2000s and 10s, their days were finally numbered. New accessibility requirements, aging equipment, and the introduction of replacement rolling stock meant the Pacer era was coming to an end. Class 142s disappeared from regular passenger service during 2020, while the final Class 143 and Class 144 passenger workings followed shortly afterwards. After almost 40 years, Britain's bouncing trains had finally bounced into retirement. Except, of course, that wasn't quite the end. A number of Pacers have been preserved. Some have found homes on heritage railways, while others have been acquired for unusual private uses, and perhaps time has softened their reputation. Because the very characteristics that frustrated commuters have now made Pacers fascinating pieces of railway history. They represent a very particular period of British railway thinking, an era when engineers were challenged to produce an extremely economical train capable of keeping less profitable services running. Were pacers comfortable? Not particularly. Were they sophisticated? Certainly not. Did passengers sometimes wonder whether their fillings would still be in place when they reached their destination? Quite possibly. But they did a job. For decades, these simple little trains carried millions of passengers to work, school, university, shopping trips, and countless other destinations. And there is an argument that without inexpensive trains such as the Pacers, some regional railway services might have faced an uncertain future. Today, Britain's railway is rapidly filling with sophisticated modern trains featuring air conditioning, passenger information displays, power sockets, and increasingly advanced technology. But few of them are likely to develop quite the same personality as the humble pacer. The squealing wheels, the rattling interior, and that unmistakable bouncing ride became part of British railway history. They were cheap, they were basic, they were controversial, and somehow they lasted for nearly 4 decades. The Pacers weren't Britain's finest trains, but they might just have been among its most unforgettable. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at the bouncing tale of Britain's famous pacer trains and the remarkable story behind one of the most unusual designs ever to operate on the British railway network. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like, share it with your friends and fellow railway enthusiasts, and subscribe to the channel for more railway history, driver's eye views and fascinating stories from the world of trains. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.